I'm just wondering, what's our angle on the Florida City water? There's no follow-up to that one.
Well, there's a couple for me. So they're kind of thinking this is some amateur hacker, which maybe it was, probably it was, but this could have been a more coordinated attack. And if one city was susceptible, there are many cities in this country.
Yeah, I think that I can. We're recording, so
We
let's
are.
go. I like it.
All right.
Welcome to the Deep Chat.
So hackers attempted to poison Florida's city water supply. Didn't work, but still terrifying.
It partially worked, right?
They
So
got in, yeah.
to sum it up, a hacker presumably hacked into the water treatment facility via TeamViewer. TeamViewer is a remote control software for computers, and put way more lye, which is used to treat the pipes, into the city's water supply. It was caught very, very quickly because they have sensors that say if something's off. But the point is, someone hacked in and tried to do something that would have harmed a lot of people. It did get caught.
I don't want to say we were lucky, because lucky would have maybe been that this never happened, but they had redundant systems. It was caught. It was fixed by a human operator. But in theory, 15,000 people could have been at serious risk.
Personally, I think little attacks like this are going to become more frequent as cyber warfare becomes the norm versus the economic or, physical warfare. Making the public more aware of this, more aware of the fact that these little things can have large impacts, is probably a good thing. There's a term in the security world and computer world, security through obscurity.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a certain amount of security through obscurity still. Like, there's this assumption that I have a password, we're good. Our system, who really cares about our system? Why would anybody want to break into the water treatment facility? This is needs to be reevaluated. And I think it is happening, but I think the general populace needs to be more aware of the impact that a single person can have on security issues. For instance, it appears in this case that the TeamViewer, the software used to control the computer, was hacked because of a weak password.
Not just a weak password, but a shared password that everyone in the organization all had.
Even worse.
Yeah.
Everybody preaches password has to have an uppercase letter, a lowercase letter, a number, and maybe a special character. Here's the reason why. And then also preaches do not share your passwords. It's really important not to share your passwords for this very reason, because now they don't know who the source was.
I mean, it could have been an inside job. We don't know. If at a minimum everyone had a unique password, you would have at least been able to isolate and research a little bit better.
You could find out what account it was logged in under, so then you knew who the target was in terms of the attack to get their password. You could find out or do an audit on that particular person's computer to find out if there's any viruses or Trojans. You could interview them about any strange requests for information or discussions they might have had. There's a lot of ways to dissect that one and investigate it, but with the shared password, it basically means auditing every single person that had access to that password.
I don't know why this is remotely accessible anyways. You would think that the water system would be air-gapped.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that goes back to security through obscurity and then also probably convenience. Air-gapped, let's establish that. Air-gapped means that a network is not connected to another network. When you're on that network, you are physically gapped from, say, the internet. It cannot connect to the internet because any connection to the internet would open it up for bug or attacks. So, for instance, people referenced the Dominion systems in the voting recently. I don't know a lot about it, but I do know one of the criticisms, and I'm not even sure if it's true, was that they were connected to the internet. So being connected to the internet makes you much more likely to be hacked. So the air gap would be, I would think, would be just as important as air gapping classified data in this sense. The air gap would prevent a huge portion of this from happening because once it's air gapped, someone has to have physical access to the network or a computer on that network.
And to do that, that's like intelligence agency level stuff. That's a pretty serious attack.
In this case, this is extremely poor form.
Yeah.
Everyone shared a password. They had TeamViewer so they could remote desktop in, and it was connected to the internet. So it sounds to me like convenience trumped security in this case. Or they don't even have a security person.
I suspect they have no security person because basic best practices are not being followed here. If they had a security person, I mean, we need to investigate that person. Maybe they need to be dismissed, or more than likely, they've been angry and no one ever listened to them.
Yep. And for what it's worth, a lot of security people, everybody hates them because they make everybody's lives a little bit more difficult when coding or when doing work.
Fair.
But the reality is you have to take it very seriously. And now something interesting in the article, they do say this person might have wanted to be caught because they took control of the person's computer during the day when that person saw that it was happening. When I read that, I thought, okay, well, there's a good chance that this is a white hat, which means a hacker who is trying to point out security holes for the good of people as opposed to steal something or harm somebody.
Like an independent professional who's hired to try and break into a bank to show that you can or can't break into that bank.
How did they even know the interface to change the amount of lye that went into the water?
That's a very good question. Yeah, that's what leads me more to wonder if this was some sort of inside job, because breaking into things broadly, like TeamViewer is a common target. It's not a very popular solution anymore, and it tends to be used by teams that don't consider security a priority. And you can broadly look for TeamViewer servers to connect to and just kind of randomly try default passwords, common passwords. So just getting in as step one, that's not surprising. But once you're in, if I was in a chemical treatment plant, I wouldn't know what to do with it.
Yeah, what does that software look like? I mean, this must be some really well-designed user interface for water treatment facilities. I mean, because most user interfaces are horrible, much less user interfaces designed on a budget.
And you need to train the person how to operate it.
I just think whoever was doing that must have known or been in some way what that software looked like, or they could have done their homework and said, okay, this facility, there's only 2 software vendors who make water treatment software, and they found the one online and looked at screenshots and did some tutorials and then went in there, which would be awfully smart of them, which would not lend itself towards being a white hat. If they're white hat, just showing that they got in is enough. They actually did it.
True.
Changed the amount of lye and could have harmed some people. So it's weird. I find this one suspicious just for those reasons. There's some part of this story that's unknown.
Yeah, I really wish and the only way I could get what I want to know is to have been an employee there to assess could someone have figured this out or stumbled into it or whatever. Another possibility is that what I was talking about, where people broadly just try and crack anything, they target TeamViewer all over the world, then you get into a couple of places a day. You look at them, you try and figure out what it is. Probably 9 times out of 10 it's something boring or mundane, or you don't know what to do with it. There is an aftermarket where you can sell stuff like that, like a dark web kind of thing. So this could have been somebody found the exploit and sold it to another nation state, if we want to get really deep into conspiracy or something.
Then why did they take control of the computer and mess with it? Because it would be just enough to go in and say, look, this is an open exploit. Here's the password. I didn't touch anything because I don't want to draw attention to the exploit.
Or, well, let's say I'm a bad guy and I'm the one who finds out how to get in. I figure out it's a water treatment facility, but I don't know much about it. And since I'm a bad guy, I'm connected to the Taliban or ISIS or whatever. I call up my buddy over there and I give him the link.
Sure. I get that. But why would you make a risk or perform something that caused the risk of being caught, which would invalidate that exploit?
Yeah, so is this an obvious attack? Did the person know, hey, they're going to catch this right away and fix it? Did they know about that redundant system? Not sure.
There's another possibility. In the article, they say, this was likely not a nation state. I hope that this water treatment facility gets some serious security experts, because somebody got in, and if they don't audit every single thing in their system and every single computer, they're hosed, because you could have a much worse exploit sitting in there waiting to unfold, but you did this other thing that seemed rather obvious and didn't harm anyone.
Yeah, there could be a Trojan horse still sitting there.
Sort of, yeah, there could be. And it could just be another thing with the nation states. They
practice.
They poke and they practice and they do one and then they go, okay, well, now we know the typical reaction, and it's piss poor, which is what it was, and then they go try it somewhere else.
Right.
And it's not hard security wise anymore, and everybody should pay attention to this. It is not hard. An amateur can basically probe a system for holes right now.
Right. And when that system, like, I would almost say willfully ignores basic security practices, they're going to get in.
Exactly.
Something that, I don't know why it's remote at all, but if it needs to be, how could there not have been two-factor authentication on this?
I mean, especially for water treatment. I mean, you're talking people's lives. It can be affected by this.
Yeah. I've made some mistakes in my career, but never that could have caused the deaths of 15,000 people.
Right.
All right, so you're the mayor of Oldsmar, Florida. What do you do next?
I would call for an audit of all those machines. I would likely, you couldn't shut down people's water, but you have to get someone in there day of auditing the machines that are responsible for the water to make sure there's not other problems. And I would be urgently monitoring any water coming out of that facility, which I think they're doing to their credit, to make sure that there's not some other exploit happening or some other problem happening. You know, first secure the safety of people. And then I would have them, I would fire the security expert if there was one, which I don't think there was.
Right.
And
I
would
bet there was no role at a small place like this.
I would hire someone probably by talking to local municipalities and saying, hey, let's co-hire and split the cost of a full-time security person.
Right. That was going to be the next point I brought up is like, this is a town of 15,000 residents. We got to cut the team a little slack. I'm sure it's a small and, modestly compensated team. I mean, that doesn't, not as an excuse, but yeah, I bet there wasn't a cyber professional there. And that's not any of the existing team members' fault. Or if there was, that person was probably disgruntled, like I said. Not in the way that they did this, but in the way that they saw it coming and no one listened to them.
Agreed.
And if that's the case, give that person a promotion.
Yeah.
Right? Because they need more power to get their job done.
Yeah. I'm sure there was someone who, well, I don't know, maybe I give people too much credit, because when people start to operate in groups, they do things that you can't predict on an individual basis, right?
Yes.
Well, everybody else does it this way, so I'm just not going to worry about it. Hopefully there was that person who bucked the trend and said, hey, I'm not sure this is a good idea to have a shared password.
Earlier, I might have been someone who set something up like this in, let's say, my early 20s. There's a spirit you will find in a lot of software engineers of like, let's get it done. There's unrealistic deadlines. There's all this pressure. We need to accomplish the goal. Not necessarily have this long-term great plan that's going to work out. And in some sense, that might be the attitude you want from your software engineers. Find ways to get it done. But then you need to have other professionals who complete the picture.
Yeah, absolutely. We do that at our company all the time. We have the pressure of the engineers trying to get stuff done, and then we have security saying, whoa, slow down there. We got to take a look at this. There needs to be a budget in all companies that are exposed to the internet, which is pretty much everybody, for a security person. Everyone should have one. In fact, now it's making me want to start a security company and become an expert there.
Well, or
there's a lot of those.
Yeah, or you need to buy into a cloud system, Amazon, Azure, GCP, that provides some of these tools out of the box, VPNs and whatnot.
Yes, absolutely, which is what, again, we do too. Yeah.
So I am going to put some onus on the team there, though. There's a phrase I picked up at some point. I wish I'd thought of this. It's a great bit of fortune cookie wisdom. Why do we never have enough time to build it right the first time, but we always have enough time to build it twice?
Yeah, I love that quote. I don't know what to say to that because it's true, but I think the real world pressure of trying to roll out features in software, the idea of fail early, fail fast, is pretty much the thing that drives this. We want to fail fast so that we can learn from it and adjust, because software is nothing more than changing code. It's not building something physical. In the old days of engineering, when you were building something physical, you didn't want to fail fast. You wanted to get it right the first time, right?
Yeah, you can't iterate on a building.
That mentality started to get eclipsed by this idea in software that we want to fail fast and rewrite the software, fail again, rewrite, fail again, rewrite. That's just how software engineers work. That's what we do. We write it, we test it, we write it, we test it. Then extend that into the world of write it, test it, deploy it, let people use it, learn from it, and cycle back and keep cycling back. The problem becomes when you do that too fast, you can introduce bugs, which we know about, that can cause problems for customers. So it depends on the criticality of your system.
The majority of cities and townships and municipalities in the country are on the smaller side and might not be able to afford a top tier security professional. Do you think World War III starts with a nationwide attack on various water systems?
Not necessarily water systems, I don't think, but I do think that infrastructure attacks are the types of attacks that we will see more of, or that, and I don't think that they'll start World War III, but I do think that on a day in, day out basis, we are probably defending against a lot of those already.
I'll bet, yeah.
And it's well on the government's radar to be ready for these types of cyber warfare. I mean, cyber warfare is a word because it's real.
Yeah.
For the most part, it's probably like a holding pattern for these countries that they're probably out there just trying to penetrate as many systems as possible, but doing nothing in a lot of them, just waiting. It's kind of like building your nuclear arsenal. We know you have one, you know we have one, but we're not going to pull the trigger because that would just harm everyone. Nobody really wants to make it apparent. And if something does happen, the government's keeping it quiet because it's not in the vested interest to panic everyone.
Yeah.
I'm actually surprised that article got it published.
I'm very glad it did. I think that's the level of transparency we need. But stuff like Stuxnet, I'm always shocked how few people know about that. I mean, obviously that Stuxnet, the attack that allegedly the U.S. and the Mossad conducted against the Iranian uranium enrichment plants, that we've maybe talked a little bit about before. That hits a lot of notes with me personally and the stuff I'm interested in, so obviously I'm going to know about it more than other people, but I don't know why that isn't just on the tip of everyone's tongue. We should all know about Stuxnet. What a major event that was.
I think if you didn't say Stuxnet and you said, hey, do you remember that time that there was a virus that took out the Iranian centrifuges? People might recognize that because I forgot that it was called Stuxnet.
Gotcha. That's a good point. Maybe I should test that.
Test it. Who did it? We don't know. They're going to try to keep it as quiet. They're going to route it through other countries, and it's going to become so obscure that nobody really for 100% certain knows what the source of the attack was. With enough information, they do and do know, but in a lot of cases, it's going to be all these little one-offs are going to be fairly questionable as to origin.
I think people on the inside know more than you think. Like, yeah, in a perfect world, we have a trace with IP addresses and cameras and stuff and like incontrovertible evidence that'll hold up in court. But just as my suspicion is that someone who works in that department knows if this was an inside job or not. And even if they don't know who did it, they're like only an insider could have done this. I trust that people inside something have good instincts like that for the most part. And like there's another famous cyber attack that happened when the Chinese were hosting the Olympics. Do you know this one?
I do not.
They took out all of the Wi-Fi and the whole opening games thing for hours. And the Chinese actually fought off the attack and sort of got it back up. It was more of a gaffe and a intermediate interruption. It wasn't a total takedown. But it was a massive coordinated attack, and in retrospect, so they've obviously done a lot of digital forensics on this, untraceable, quote unquote, in the sense that like random IPs, Tor, all this kind of anonymous stuff. But you can even look at the types of malware used and the like style of coding and whatnot that's in there, the comments and mistakes in it, and they were able to basically say, oh, this was a Russian effort. Or was it South Korean? I can't remember. It was one of the two. But whoever, they labeled an adversary pretty quickly just from the way it smelled. And so if it wasn't that adversary that they pointed to, it was someone definitely pretending to be that adversary, which is a whole other layer to it.
Your DNA tells you a lot about you, right? Mm-hmm. And it also can tell you your rough countries of origin. There's whole companies founded on that. So similar to that, you can look at source code or the types of attacks it was and the tools used and have sort of a DNA based on a country.
True.
Roughly, this is likely to come from this country because maybe they did find some characters that were Russian inside of it. Now, I would question the level of skill if they left comments in the code that were in another language.
Well, there's a little more than that. Those are things I would call like fingerprints and easy to fake. But even more so, like, well, let's give an analogy. Like, let's say a friend of yours, mine or anybody else, you heard like you got a call from like the police. You say, "Hey, we're investigating this person for a crime." There are things that you would immediately say plausible or not. Like if they said, "Hey, we think Kyle is committing Grand Theft Auto," you'd be like, "No, that's obviously mistaken." If you said he did something funky with securities exchanges and some bidding marketplace, algorithmic stuff, not that you'd be like, "Oh yeah, I think my friend's guilty," but at least that sort of resonates with something that's a plausible crime I would commit, you know? And it was more of that level of analogy. Like they know the areas of skill that these various intelligence groups have, and the style of attack. Like a buffer overflow is one type of attack. Some people get really good at buffer overflows, and you're like, oh, that's this probably from this group. And it was that sort of detective work that they did.
Right. Yeah, I'm just not sure how far that will take you, but it'll
Sure.
give you a rough estimate. You know, if it's someone trying to get you to wire money, then it's probably from Ghana. I'm joking, you know, those emails, right?
Sure, yeah.
But I hear you. Yeah, the sophistication of is an indicator, and the tools used as an indicator. There won't be a declaration of cyber warfare. Right now, if we want to go to war, there's a declaration of war, right? I don't think we'll ever see a declaration of cyber warfare. What do you think?
I'm not sure. I know there's a lot that in general the public doesn't know now, or I'm pretty confident of that. But a bona fide attack, cyber attack, in which the intent was, and let's assume was achieved, to harm an American citizen in a substantive way, not their bank account, but like physically harm them, like this water attack, I gotta believe there would be a declaration of cyber war, right? And we'd hear about it.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
You probably would know better than me.
No, this is not based on what my experience at all. I just think that it would have to be catastrophic for, like, for instance, hacked the water system of LA and 1 million people died, or 100,000 people died, right?
Yeah.
It would have to be so large that it would put us over the top to say, okay, yes, we have to admit this was cyber warfare. And now we have to go after whatever country of origin it was. And we know which country it was.
Contrast that to Pearl Harbor.
Well, that's what I'm saying here is it would have to be big like that in order for it to be declaration of cyber warfare. And my point is that these attacks will continue to be more probing attacks, and that they will be swept under the rug because in general, people don't want to know how, or I think the view in the government or in municipalities or whatnot, people don't really want to know how bad it can get. So sweep it under the rug, put the patch in, and let's everybody go on with their daily lives. It's similar to municipalities and towns and cities suppressing crime rates, right? Just statistically. Let's not call it that. Let's write that one up under something else.
Or downgrade it from type 1 to type 2.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's not a felony. That's a misdemeanor.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, look, LA's crime rate went down. Why? Because we reclassified a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
It really hasn't. I don't know that it's gone down for any other reason than that we're not prosecuting those things. Could cyber warfare happen, like a declaration of warfare from a cyber attack? Yes. I think it's unlikely for quite some time because I don't think anybody wants to open Pandora's box like that.
Let's hope not. I mean, it's not as bad as nuclear war, but it's probably the number 2.
Yeah, well, you can definitely harm a lot of people, but I think between large countries, there's this sort of perception that, gosh, if we pull that, there's no going back. Although, not to China's credit, but contrast this, China did blow up one of its own satellites.
Right.
They did it intentionally with a missile, and everybody was mad at them because it created a bunch of space debris. They did it presumably not to see if they could do it for their own information, because we know we can, but to show other countries that, hey, look, we'll blow up a missile, or we'll blow up a satellite. They were willing to do that. Now they didn't blow up they didn't blow up one of ours or someone else. They blew up theirs. It would be like attacking their own municipal water system in one of their provinces
In an abandoned town.
in an abandoned town just to prove that it could happen.
Yep.
The warning was there. I think if there's going to be a cyber attack that induces sort of a warfare of any form, it would be from, as usual, some kind of rogue
Splinter group.
extremist,
Yeah. Or like,
extremist nation. Like we've seen in the Middle East from Iraq or Afghanistan. I think that's where the threat is, because China, for all its economic might and bluster, just like the U.S., we don't want to go to war.
Right.
A big war like that. Nobody does.
and both countries are large shapes on the map that can easily be attacked. It's almost scarier to think it's some rogue group.
Yeah, and that goes back to that our biological discussion. What scares me more is these biological attacks, but not from big countries, but from smaller, more extremist countries that have just enough resources to get their hands on the right material and build a virus worse than Ebola.
Right. Yeah, technology currently holds us back from that. I don't think we have the science to, well, we have enough science to do horrible chemical warfare, which are just like virus engineering is a whole other level we haven't gotten to yet. But yeah, that'll be a threat to face one day.
Absolutely.